V for Vendetta, the long-awaited and indeed long-delayed adaptation of Alan Moore's infamous graphic novel, the film at least, set in near-future Britain, which has become a totalitarian state lorded over by a Big Brother-style character played by John Hurt. Hugo Weaving, who incidentally replaced James Purefoy in the lead role.
Was the idea that James Purefoy couldn't actually... Or there was some suggestion that he wasn't happy behind the mask.
Well, it's really odd because the lead character, at no point do you see their face. I mean, unlike the Judge Dredd thing in which Sylvester Stallone said, I'm not going to play Judge Dredd unless I can take the bucket off my head. And they went, OK. And then he took it off and you went, oh, it's Sylvester Stallone. In V for Vendetta, the mask stays on. So frankly, it could be... I mean, I wondered at one point whether any of what we see on screen is not Hugo Weaving, whether it is in fact Mr. Purefoy, but we shall never know.
So could it be anyone?
Well, no, I mean, yes, but no. You don't know.
Well, yes or no? Could it be anyone?
Well, it could be anyone. The voice is all of a piece, although I have to confess that watching the movie, I forgot that it was Hugo Weaving who played the lead role, who I like very much, and I started trying to figure out whose voice is that, and I actually started thinking it was Rowan Atkinson. Okay,
so it could be, I mean, we're into Darth Vader territory, because it could be anyone, frankly, behind the mask and doing the work.
Well, the amazing thing about Vader is that it's 4 people, isn't it, altogether? Because it's that pretty boy nitwit who does him in the early films. It's
Keith Prowse, the Green Cross.
David Prowse, the Green Cross.
Keith Prowse being the ticket office.
Yeah.
It's not him.
No, not him.
Anyway, whoever it is.
James Earl Jones doing the voice. And then in the original end of Return of the Jedi, when they take the bucket off Darth Vader's head, it's not any of those. It's somebody else who they then subsequently replaced with the pretty boy Hayden Christensen. 4 people to play Darth Vader.
Hence the email last week when we were in New York talking about this with a frustrated listener thinking, I really like Hugo Weaving, but I don't get to see him.
But he is good. He is a good actor in the same way as I made the comparison before that, you can... John Hurt playing the Elephant Man with the stuff on his head, you never get to see his face, but acting is about more than seeing somebody's face. It is to do with physicality, and in fact it is a very physical performance, and his delivery of the lines is ripe in that way, even if it does occasionally go into what I consider to be Blackadder territory. Now, interesting thing about the movie is while I was watching it, I did wonder whether or not sedition was still a criminal offence, because the whole plot is he is latter-day Guy Fawkes. He's living in a totalitarian state. It's not to Britain today. It's a future vision of Britain. But the mission that he's on is to blow up the Houses of Parliament. Now, of course, remember the 5th of November. The reason that we all remember that is because it's written into British consciousness as almost the worst thing that ever happened in history. Consequently, we don't celebrate Guy Fawkes doing it. We celebrate...
the fact that he was caught.
The fact that he was caught and the fact that we then dealt with him rather strictly. I think this has been slightly lost, perhaps, on some of the American audiences. The other thing is that I think will raise some alarm bells is that at one point it becomes apparent that part of V's plot involves using an admittedly disused but a subway train, an underground train packed with explosives. And the suggestion was for a long time that the November 5th release date that the film had for last year, which they said it was delayed because they didn't get some of the special effects shots finished. And indeed there are a lot of special effects shots, which I'm sure took a long time. But it was also suggested that they moved it away because of the terrorist attacks on London. They just thought people are not going to feel comfortable about this kind of stuff being used in this context. So, to get some sense of perspective over the whole thing, firstly, let it be said that Alan Moore has disowned the project. Well, Alan Moore disowns everything. He disowns everything that he's involved with to do with the big screen. He disowned From Hell. He disowned League of Extraordinary Gentlemen. He will presumably disown The Watchmen, if indeed The Watchmen happens, because the last time Paul Greengrass was on the programme...
Yeah, that's disappeared, though, I think.
Right?
I think that's gone down the tube.
OK, well, it'll happen at some point under somebody. And when it does, Alan Moore will doubtless disown it. Don't be put off by the fact that he's disowned it, because he just doesn't like the films. As far as the revolutionary stuff is concerned, it is about people rising up and overthrowing the government, even if those people include Stephen Fry, who on at least one occasion is seen preparing eggy in the basket, which, let's face it, is not an overly revolutionary thing to do. And it is a very, very Stephen Fry performance. I rather enjoyed the film. I rather enjoyed the fact that in a very pop way, it was almost like an advert for Anarchy in the UK. I mean, it's clearly filmed by outsiders. It's produced by the Wachowskis, written by the Wachowskis, pardon me. It's produced by Joel Silver, so it has an exploitation edge to it, which, as you know, I'm a fan of exploitation movies. I think if you're going to deal with politics and terrorism and the difference between terrorism and freedom fighting, I'm perfectly happy for it to be done in a pop trashy way, because in many ways those kind of films get closer to having something interesting to say than the ponderous kind of Oliver Stone conspiracy theory movies, which would be great if you could just manage to stay awake after having your head kicked in by people lecturing you. So I like all that. The design is very, very obviously comic strip, and this has offended an awful lot of comic strip fans because they think it's too obvious. They think it's not dark enough. They think it's not close enough to the Alan Moore original. Well, I haven't read the Alan Moore original, and I am sure that the differences between the two of them are vast. I think the only way you can deal with V for Vendetta, the movie, is to do exactly what Alan Moore would like you to do, which is to remove his name from the equation and see it as a standalone piece of work. And as a standalone piece of, frankly, silly but rather adventurous pot-boiling comic strip mayhem, it could be a stupid episode of The Avengers, but in fact it ends up being much more than that, and I enjoyed it much, much more than I expected. I thought Hugo Weaving was good fun. I thought Natalie Portman partly redeemed herself after some of the performances which she's done recently, which have just annoyed me like mad. I think that it's jolly and vibrant in all the right kind of ways, even when that means that occasionally it's cronky and a little bit stupid. And I think it sails just close enough to the wind in terms of dealing with issues which are sensitive in people's minds, particularly when does a terrorist become a freedom fighter and when does a freedom fighter become a terrorist. And it does have just the right level of...
it sounds from what you're saying is there's no doubt that he is a terrorist.
Oh, he is a terrorist.
But because he's operating against...
a totalitarian government.
He's a chancellor, is he?
Pardon me?
Is he called the chancellor, not the prime minister?
The John Hurt character, who is basically Big Brother, appears on huge big television screens, and so we know where we are. But bear in mind, of course, Big Brother, 1984, was written in 1948, and it's, the way that people do those things is you project into the future, but you're actually saying something about today. I mean, one of the things, for example, they said in the Variety review was that they had missed some tricks about, nudging the Blair government and saying, making points about the Blair government's dependency on PC sensibilities. There's also a lovely thing in the Variety review, which Leslie Felprin wrote, which said that the director, James McTeague, at one point said that he had in mind, whilst he was making V for Vendetta, the film Battle of Algiers. And she said, this is clearly a different version of Battle of Algiers and the famous film which we all know. It's clearly some absolutely mad, pop-tastic piece of fluff. I mean, it is fluff, it is silly, it is camp, but it is enjoyable. And I came out of it thinking, I want to go home and play a Sex Pistols album, and that is not a bad thing.
John Hurt having a bit of a revival then early on in this year, because he's a bounty hunter in The Proposition, which we reviewed on Friday. But John Hurt seems to just work and work and work and work and work. I mean, he makes an awful lot of movies. He made a couple of short films last year as well. He's just, he just does a lot of work. He was in the Ian Softly film, which very, very few people saw, Skeleton Key, and he just works a lot, and good for him. Anyway, so it's really not bad. Hugo Weaving, you don't see his face, but he does the best that he can. I think it's just edgy enough to be entertaining.